So welcome to Belfast Recover Group's Thursday night tradition meeting. I'm now going to hand over to Brian N, who is going to share on Tradition 7. Over to you, Brian.
Thank you, Mags. Thank you, Amy. Thank you, Derek. Anybody else at the service? My name is Brian. I'm an alcoholic. I'm an alcoholic who didn't take a drink last night, and which will come as no surprise to any of you, because I probably wouldn't be allowed to do this job if I did. But isn't it weird though? Isn't it kind of weird for someone who has a condition whose diagnosis would be that I have a condition where I can't stop myself from drinking alcohol? And yet I didn't take a drink last night or the night before, haven't done it for years. And I find it ridiculously easy to not drink alcohol. How did that come about? Well, there was a series of things that happened that resulted in me going to AA. I got word the other day of a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, roughly about the same age as me, committed suicide. And it was sad to hear, but then I kind of forgot about it a few moments later. You know, isn't that really awful? I remember the first couple of times I never heard that other fellows had died, being really perplexed. And actually, whenever I was working through the steps, there was a guy in the group that I went to had committed suicide as well, and it took me months to get over it. And this kind of just washes over me now. Isn't that awful? And I guess it's just that frequent that it's not as shocking as it should be, right? You know, a man died, and this man was attending meetings that I am familiar with, and they fall into the category that I would describe as shit. And what I mean by that is they do not offer Alcoholics Anonymous, they do not offer the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, and they discourage people from working the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, but they have a sign on their door that fucking says Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, can you tell me how that makes sense? So, I don't know, maybe I'm just lucky, right? Because I went to a meeting that was probably the worst group I've ever attended in my life. And it just so happened that there was a guy from out of town happened to be there and plucked me from that meeting and put me through the 12 steps starting the following morning, after which I recovered because it did exactly what it says in the program. He gave me exactly what he was supposed to give me from the program, and it worked. Of course it worked. That's the formula, isn't it? You know, if you're baking a cake and you set your little oven to the right temperature and you put all the ingredients in and you mix when you're supposed to mix and whatever, I don't really know how to bake a cake, but you know what I mean? You do exactly what you're supposed to do, and then you take it out at the allocated time. What have you got? You got a cake, right? Well, this is what happened to me. The correct recipe and formula was followed, and out came someone who'd recovered from alcoholism, as evidenced by the fact that I don't fight it anymore. What a wonderful thing. And the reason why I say lucky and not blessed, and I don't know, we all have different ways of looking at spirituality, but I struggle to think that I'm blessed, because that would imply that the God of my understanding favored me more than that poor guy who wasn't given the program. And I really struggle with this whole, don't worry about it, God's an AA, God's looking after the whole thing, whatever, whenever the evidence that I can see is you get really lucky if you happen to stumble upon someone in whom the problem has been solved, whose whole deportment is shouting that he's a man or a woman with a real answer, the sort of things that in this group you come to expect. My dear friend Mags at the introduction there was saying to new folks, hey, if you're new around, you know, you haven't got a sponsor, I make it my problem. I'll get you hooked up with one tomorrow and get you a book and shit and get you started. And those who have only ever known this group, you know, I wonder, do you realize how unusual this is in this jurisdiction? This is like an odd thing. And I say all that only for to say that this kind of a, you know, keep it simple terminology that I've heard quite a lot. And, you know, whenever we first started the group, there was, you know, our critics, so pretty much everyone except us, were saying things like, oh, they overcomplicate things with their highlighters and their big book, whatever. We should keep it simple and whatever. And, you know, Bill Wilson experienced some of these problems whenever he was trying to impress upon the rest of the fellowship the importance of the 12 traditions. These guys all had their own ways of doing things, and he's talking about unifying around this common purpose and finding the right ways to do it. And oh my God, why wouldn't he keep it simple? Whatever. Yeah, but do you want to keep it simple though, right? It would not be the right thing to do to keep it simple, because if the new guy came in and thought, oh my God, it's so fucking complicated, we don't want to frighten people off with overcomplicating the program either, do we? And I want to just read something from Language of the Heart, one of the Grapevine magazine articles just on that, just to set the tone in around Bill Wilson's experience with this very thing and how it relates to the traditions, and then we'll see how that launches us into tradition 5, if at all. So I'm reading from this version of Language of the Heart. I know there's two with two different page number orders, and from page 305, where it reads, a formless AA anarchy, animated only by the let's get together spirit, just isn't enough for AAs here and now. What worked fine for 2 members in 1938 won't work at all for the more than 200,000 of them in 1960. Our added size and therefore greater responsibility simply spells the difference between AA's childhood and his coming of age. We have seen the folly of attempting to recapture the childhood variety of simplicity in order to sidestep the kind of responsibility that must always be faced to, quote, keep it simple for today. We cannot possibly turn back the clock and shouldn't try. The history of our changing ideas about simplicity for today is fascinating. For example, the time came when we could actually had to codify or organize, if you please, the basic principles that had emerged out of our experience. There was a lot of resistance to this. It was stoutly claimed by many that our then simple but rather garbled word-of-mouth recovery program was being made too complicated by the publication of AA's 12 steps. We were throwing simplicity out the window, it was said. But that was not so. One is only to ask, where would AA be today, and this is 1960, without its 12 steps? That these principles were carefully defined and published in 1939 has done only the Lord knows how much good. Codification has vastly simplified our task. Who could contest that now? In 1945, a similar outcry when sound principles of living and working together were clearly outlined in AA's 12 traditions. It was then anything but simple to get agreement about them. Yet who can now say that our AA lives have been complicated by the traditions? On the contrary, these sharply defined principles have immensely simplified the task of maintaining unity. And unity for us AAs is a matter of life and death. I, for one, understand that whenever I attend these meetings or sit down in front of a newcomer working through the 12 steps, that I've taken on my role in the saving of lives business. And the business that I'm involved in for the generate income for my family is less important than the saving of lives business, because you save lives in that one. It's not a huge thing. And this childhood version, this juvenile version of simplicity is not what we seek. And Bill Wilson was calling that out. This charging around, doing our own thing, everybody's going to be looking at it, keep it simple, nonsense. It's childish. But whenever we codify some guidelines by which we can follow the recipe that I referred to earlier in the form of the 12 steps, we keep it simple because Amy uses the same one, Jules uses the same one, so does Laws, so does Elaine, so does Roseanne. We're using the same recipe. So that whenever people come to us for solutions, although we may well have different accents and different personalities and different methods of presentation and to some extent some different experiences to add context, we're following the same thing. And by that, it is simple. I guess the term simple could be interpreted a different way, as in lacking of intelligence, and that's what we need to avoid. Bill Wilson trying to explain to the early members in the groups that were springing up all over the place that this has got a wee bit wonky, guys. It's all got a wee bit haywire. We need to unify. Most weeks we read from the forward to the second edition, and just a recap without reading because we've got quite a lot to get through tonight. Within that, you see the story of the lads started out just the two of them, then there was a third, and then AA grew, and then there was a significant article in the Saturday Evening Post that caused this mushrooming process, and groups are springing up all over the place, and what one guy was doing in one group and all the rest of his little sponsees was different to what was happening down the road. And there's this element of chaos. So the 12 traditions, as we now know them, they're called something else at the time, but were brought in to simplify the attempts at unity. And the cries out from those towards whom Bill was trying to impress these principles was like, oh, Bill, stop all this, just try and keep it simple, which is similar to the point that I was making in relation to the steps. I don't know. Looking at the screen and I see people here from different jurisdictions, and I wonder how many meetings you can go into within, 30 miles of where you live, and what percentage of those meetings would be ones that would promote the 12 steps. Where I live, very few. I can think of none. Disappointing. It's just the way it is. So if that's keeping it simple in terms of helping people recover from alcoholism, then I put it to those people that perhaps you may well be building a platform upon which people can commit suicide rather than get well. So there's a sobering fact. And, Bill Wilson continued with his attempts to promote and to encourage groups to get on board with the 12 traditions, because it is in our unity that we find this simple way of achieving an outcome. And the outcome is defined on page 17 of the big book, and we don't have the bandwidth to read that again today, but it talks about us unifying around a common purpose and standing shoulder to shoulder, and in this task, and I paraphrase it as being, we're out here trying to rid the world of alcoholism one drunk at a time using the big book and the 12 steps within. It's not a beautiful thing that we're doing all of that together? I will recap slightly on a few important parts that I can't really duck past no matter how much of to get through tonight. Let me just bring up this wee quick graphic, and I can remember how to do this again. Hang on. Actually, Max, would you give me the keys, please?
Yeah, I've just given them there.
So much. So let me see. Okay, so there's the 12 steps. Is yep, like books on a shelf, all in a row, and we have them color coded. And you'll notice that 1 and 12 are grouped together, which is why on week 1 we covered 1 and 12 rather than going from 1 to 2, because 1 talks about or goes into the purpose of why we have the traditions in the first place is to unify, and not necessarily for us all to agree, for us to have healthy debates. It's an interesting thing, it's a fun thing, and for us to have different customs as outlined in our 4th tradition. It's all perfectly fine, but we unify around this common purpose. How do we do that? Well, that's where tradition 12 comes in. We do that through anonymity, and it's not the withholding of one's full name. You can see on the screen that I show my full name. This meeting is recorded, and I've no idea where it's going to go, so I don't say my full name, and we'll go into more details about that once we get to tradition 11. It is, however, about the placing of principles before personalities. It's about deflating me and individuals like me. It's about deflating every one of us. And it doesn't mean principles in a general sense. It's talking about the 36 spiritual principles of Alcoholics Anonymous. So I am here to carry the wishes of Alcoholics Anonymous, and it is incumbent on me to learn them. That's the 12 steps, which are to be found in the big book. There's the 12 traditions and the 12 concepts for world service. Those are the principles around which we unify. And if I'm placing principles before personalities at our business meetings, then when I'm speaking, I'm saying things like, well, in relation to tradition, whatever, or like it says in the big book or whatever, rather than, well, in my opinion, we should do this, that, and the other, because then I've gone way off track. And that way we can all get in the same line, working for the same purpose. And whenever the new person comes in, doesn't matter which one of us they come to, because we're all trying to do the same thing. Isn't that wonderful? We talked then about authority as outlined in the second tradition. And my word, we could have spent months on that. I covered it for 2 weeks. Mags then came in for a third week. So we spent 3 weeks on one tradition, and we barely scraped the surface. But, the highlights of that being the service structure works with this inverted triangle where the new person walking in the room this evening, still stinking of alcohol from the last drink this morning, is the boss. And the trustees of the General Service Board are at the bottom of this pyramid. They're just greater servants with less authority than the new guy. It's really odd to me. He comes from a corporate structure, but that's the way the AA structure works for the benefit of its members as defined within Tradition 3. And the members of Alcoholics Anonymous are alcoholics who wish to recover, who say they're members. Now, you can be a member if you say you are and ignore everything else, but only by virtue of a right to be wrong. So if you don't want to be wrong, you need to be an alcoholic and you need to wish to recover. And if that's the case, come and join us. We'll help you out and we'll get you working through the 12 steps. If not, I don't know, you might be better moseying on somewhere else. And the autonomy of Tradition 4 is not like a veto for the rest of the traditions that will empower a group or an individual to do whatever the hell they like. Many times have you heard in business meetings over the years, oh, well, our group's autonomous, we don't have to follow traditions or whatever. And that's obviously just a load of shite. And the fourth tradition is about setting up customs that would uniquely empower our group or your group for to carry the message as defined in Tradition 1 to the newcomer. And that links into Tradition 5, the primary purpose, which is defined as the group's message. So the group's message is the sum of Tradition 1 and Tradition 4. It is the message with the customs of the individual group that were defined through autonomy for to show how to carry the message. Without overcomplicating this, I like the visual of a high street. Let's imagine a high street upon which Mags has a shop, and it's got loads of pink shit everywhere and fluffy things and all the rest. But she sells the 12 steps as outlined in the book Alcoholics Anonymous. Law's shop looks like a gym with black shit everywhere and all that, and men running around and tattoos and whatever, and but you know what he's selling? Same thing. I'll not describe Amy's shop, it's too weird, but the point is the same thing. So as the shopper or the newcomer walks down that high street, they may well decide that they want to go into Mags' shop to buy the big book and the 12 steps as outlined within. This work with a sponsor, with the desperation of a drowning man. But you know what? If they walk into my shop, they're getting the same thing. The presentation, the customs, the accent, the personality might be different. And all these different groups can differ in all these different ways. But that is not a veto to carrying the program. It must not be seen that way. Can groups deviate away from the program and still carry the branding of Alcoholics Anonymous? Well, yes, by virtue of a right to be wrong. Again, why would you want to do anything by virtue of a right to be wrong? All right, so we spoke there last week then about Tradition 6, and one of the key points of Tradition 6 is about staying poor, making sure we don't hoard the money, and that we don't tie ourselves up with any other organizations. We're not seen and as affiliating with anyone else, even if that's implied. Just be careful with what we say. Whenever one very, very loose example that I like to give is that whenever I talk about my own story that had me go through a treatment center, I don't mention the name of the treatment center. I'm not here to recommend these guys. It's just I went to one. Who cares? But, it's my job is to talk about the 12 steps as outlined in the book Alcoholics Anonymous, and really nothing else, just my experience of working that. So now it brings us on to Tradition 7 that we all know so well because we read it out at every meeting, so therefore we're experts at it. And certainly before I was invited to host tradition meetings some time ago, I thought I knew more about Tradition 7 than I actually did. And all right, let's get into it. Let me read out the short form and then the long form. So the short form of Tradition 7. AA group ought to be fully self-supporting, declining outside contributions. The long form, our AA experience has taught us that the AA groups themselves ought to be fully supported by the voluntary contributions of their own members. We think that each group should achieve this ideal, that any public solicitation of funds using the name of Alcoholics Anonymous is highly dangerous, whether by groups, clubs, hospitals, or other outside agencies that acceptance of large gifts from any source or of contributions carrying obligations whatsoever is unwise. There too, we view with much concern those AA treasuries which continue beyond prudent reserve to accumulate funds for no stated AA purpose. Experience has often warned us that nothing can so surely destroy our spiritual heritage as futile disputes over property, money, and authority. It's quite a wordy one, and it's a meaty one, and I don't know. I was sort of just jotting down a few bullet points before we started, and I was thinking, in which order should I approach these, because there's just that much, and I guess it doesn't really matter. But we'll maybe start off with the self-supporting element of it. Okay, well, let's read from AA Comes of Age, page 111. I'm not sure if you guys have had the chance to read this book yet, but it's a really good one, and it really helps with the understanding of the traditions because there's context. If you see the context around which the traditions were formed, and they didn't sit around and go, I've got a good idea, let's write some traditions. And like even the use of the word traditions is an odd one, isn't it? Like, you know, they're not traditional, like they're not like something of old they're referring to, they're new, but they're traditional in the sense that they come from the past, they come from experiences. So things that went wrong. You might call them AA's 12 biggest mistakes. But yeah, in relation to Tradition 7 on page 111, it says, despite our early tradition of keeping AA poor for its own safety, we were still to have temptation. There were three of them. The first came when we met with Mr. John D. Rockefeller Jr. and his friends in the fall of 1937. At that time, the possibility of unlimited financial backing pretty much dimmed our sharing of the vision of St. Francis. Dr. Bob and I, indeed most of us, were awfully broke. Ideas of comfortable and well-paid jobs, chains of AA hospitals, and tons of free literature for suffering alkies seized our imagination. But Mr. Rockefeller had other ideas. He said, I think money will spoil us. He acted accordingly, and AA stayed poor. St. Francis had given us the idea, but John D. wisely forced us to live up to it. This was the oddly assorted pair who were really responsible for AA's tradition on money. Thank God for them both. So AA is not taking any money from John D. Rockefeller, and certainly not in the form of a gift or a donation, and has come up with this very, very clear guideline that would have it self-supporting by its own membership. So not taking money from anybody outside AA. And there's all different elements of AA, and of course there's the sale of books, and that generates income, and there's various other things that happen, but essentially the money comes from the tabletop contributions. Just on a side note, whenever we did this workshop in 2021, at that stage I was able to pull some stats that showed the decline in the sale of books over the 10 years prior to that. I couldn't find those notes, but the gist of it is they went down. Went down dramatically. And that's like, you know, sometimes within this microcosm of Alcoholics Anonymous, we think that our patterns and behaviors might be different to the outside world, but books in their physical form, generally the sales are going down dramatically. And there's meetings that I used to attend in the physical form. I don't go to very, very many physical meetings anymore, but you know, it wouldn't be unusual to go into big book studies and see folks sitting with a tablet on a PDF. You know, it's becoming less common that books will be sold to the same quantities that they have been. So that revenue stream is dwindling in Alcoholics Anonymous. So we're relying entirely on the donations or the contributions from our members. And that to me doesn't make any sense. So I said before that the purpose of the 12 traditions is to protect Alcoholics Anonymous from me and people like me. And that's maybe because none of this makes sense unless it's explained thoroughly. Because, like, why would you not just take money? Like, we're in the saving of lives business. And if some rich guy says, well, I've got a couple of £1,000,000, do you want it? We say no. Isn't that mad? We refuse to take money from the outside, regardless of who it's from or whether the individual in question is ethical, whether they want anything from us or not. The answer is no. We have to be self-supporting. So much so, an example of the extremes to which Alcoholics Anonymous go to protect this tradition, our colleagues in York in the United Kingdom, a jurisdiction in which it is essentially illegal to refuse donations into a charity. And the General Service Board of Alcoholics Anonymous, of course, is a registered charity. It's not entirely illegal to accept money, but essentially it is. Like, they would have to prove that the money came from an unethical source or whatever, but they're supposed to accept money regardless. But Alcoholics Anonymous applied for a private act of Parliament that was granted. That is called the Alcoholics Anonymous Disposition Act of 1986. And that grants the General Service Board of Alcoholics Anonymous to disclaim or refuse donations. Now, that's an unusual thing that had to be applied for, and it had to take it to the House of Commons to have an override to the law. So much so seriously did they take the integrity and the protection of that element of Tradition 7. The money needs to come from us and only us. So I want to just separate two terms that can get mixed up quite easily, and certainly at the start of my experience in AA, I got very confused with the two terms. There's donations and there's contributions. So whenever in this workshop I'm talking about contributions, what I mean is the money that we give, we put into the hat at our physical meetings, or we pay across to our AA group, or we, hit the PayPal button that Amy's put into the chat, whatever. Those are contributions. Donations, however, would be charitable donations that I might make to the General Service Board of Alcoholics Anonymous. And in Alcoholics Anonymous in Ireland, there's a cap to the maximum amount that I can give, and it's €5,000 per annum. Or I can give a one-off legacy payment of €10,000, but I can't give any more than that. And if I'm outside of Alcoholics Anonymous, I'm not permitted to do that. So we're going to spend more time talking about the contributions element of it, though, because that's where the majority of the money comes from. So let me just read from the Grapevine magazine article, which is all bundled together nicely for us in the language of the heart on page 85. So like we said in one of the previous weeks, the traditions were launched upon the world in a series of Grapevine magazine articles in the 1940s. This one was published in June 1948, and it's on the subject of contributions. So, like, how much should we contribute? Like, what's the expectation? Well, it's you put your pound in the hat, isn't that? That's what I was told. Well, what it says here is, for instance, the AA General Service Office now costs us $1.50 per member a year. In fact, the New York office asks the groups for this sum twice a year because not all of them contribute. Even so, the sum number is exceedingly small. If an AA happens to live in a large metropolitan area where an intergroup office is absolutely essential to handle heavy inquiries and hospital arrangements, he contributes, or probably should contribute, about $5 annually to pay rent in his own group meeting place, or maybe coffee and donuts. He might drop $25 a year in the hat. Or if he belongs to a club, it could be $50 in case he takes the AA Grapevine. He squanders an extra $2.50. Okay, so there's just some general confusing statements. I like how he makes it very, very simple in this next paragraph, though. So if I want to know what the expectation is on me in terms of my contributions to my AA group, Bill Wilson says, now not me, because you're all going to start attacking me in a minute, but I want to be very, very clear. This is Bill Wilson's guidance. So the AA member who really meets his group responsibilities. So if you're not somebody who's interested in meeting your group responsibilities, forget about what I'm about to say. But you wouldn't be here if you're that kind of person. So if you're the sort of person who wishes to meet your group responsibilities, Bill Wilson in 1948 is saying, finds himself liable for about $5 a month on the average. Good news, it's not much money. Yet his own personal income may be anywhere between $200 and $2,000 a month, the direct result of not drinking. $5 a month. So I can afford that. You guys up for $5 a month? Well, okay. There's a couple of things I want to discuss in around that figure and the way in which it's worded. First of all, he's talking about the average contribution is $5 a month. So let's talk about that. If you're new to Alcoholics Anonymous and you're unemployed and you're paying babysitters so you can get the meetings and whatever, it's not talking about you. You know, if you can only afford to put in £2 a year, whatever, God bless you. Thank you for your money. Amazing. You know, what we're talking about here is people who have got their shit together. If you're at the back end of the 12 steps and you're making financial amends and you're up to your eyes in that, well, it's not your money to give away. You need to make the amends first. You know, I want to be very, very clear about what I'm about to say, because some of this is going to be very hard hitting. Newcomers, just keep coming to the meetings and keep working through the program and don't worry about what I'm about to say. If you've come here and you've come to one of these meetings and someone like our Mags has offered to take you through the program the way she did there this evening, and your book was sent out and you're recovered, and then you're sponsoring people, you got your shit together, you got your job back, first of all, you're welcome. Secondly, this is who I'm talking to. This is who Bill Wilson is talking to, and I'm bold enough to extrapolate the information that he gave. Now, whenever the online meeting world happened, we found ourselves going back into the traditions to try and figure out what the hell we should do. Because I was kind of schooled on this culture of you go to a meeting and you put £1 into the hat, £1 into the hat. And whenever I was in a treatment centre, that's where that began within my training, because we weren't allowed money, but we went to an AA meeting twice a week and they give me £1 to put into the hat. And then I noticed everybody else was doing that. Now, where did that come from? Who knows? But it's not on us to figure out where this bollocks came from. It's on us to try and figure out what really the recommendations are. But whenever we tried to figure out how we should look at all the traditions in the online world, we went back in time. We went back and had a look at what the writing said, what the literature says about the traditions, and Tradition 7 is no different. So the average member of Alcoholics Anonymous, recovered folks, not the ones who are struggling, is expected, if they want to meet their group's requirements, to put in $5 a month. In 1948. $5 a month today is $67, as from 1 hour ago. Now that's the equivalent to £49.50. That's rounded up to 50 quid. Or if you live in the Irish Republic, that's 58 euros. Now, does that mean that I, stroke Bill Wilson, is saying that everybody should be spending £50 or 58 euros in their AA group? No, but it is saying that's the average. So how can this make sense? Well, I can only tell you how I made sense of this. And if you find this information useful, because I'm sure you want to meet your group's needs, then great. And we can talk about it later if you prefer. But in Northern Ireland, the average salary is £34,400 per annum. So what I get from that is, if the average contribution recommended by Bill Wilson is £50 per month, then that relates to the average person in terms of earnings, who is earning £34,400 per annum. So if you're earning £20 per annum, it's very, very easy to scale that down on a percentage basis. If you're earning more than that, we look forward to seeing higher contributions coming through as well. It's all nice and simple. It's a nice, easy way to work this out. Now, some of you will remember the first time we went over these numbers in the Belfast Recover Group workshop, and then did another one in Scotland. The Scottish are not exactly known for being generous with cash, but all hell broke loose. And I don't care, because these are the numbers. These are what the numbers say. And this culture of put £1 into the basket thing that has been driven into people's minds, I don't know where the hell that's come from. But Alcoholics Anonymous is not selling books like it used to sell. And the way in which we do AA is changing. I don't have the pressure of somebody looking at me whenever the baskets pass round to see if I skip it. I'm not like putting money in just to be seen to be doing things. I'm having to take personal responsibility for what is required of me. Now, I had a chat with the treasurer of our group today, and I was trying to figure out, what way she would prefer, what way the group would prefer for to receive the money. And the way that I pay is I've worked out what I think my monthly contribution should be based on the numbers that I just gave. And whenever I pay my bills on the first of every month, I pay that directly into the group's bank account. And that is the group's preference. Now, we're happy to accept contributions in whatever way you want, but if you're a member of this group and you can work out those numbers in that fashion, or if you want to work out the numbers in that fashion, or there are amendments to that, you might look at that and say, yeah, but I've got loads of financial amends, so it's slightly less, whatever it is, just pay a monthly amount into the group. Whenever we're making, daily meeting contributions using the PayPal button, there's a charge that's levied there, so the group isn't getting as much of it. How'd you like those numbers? They make sense? Everybody happy with that? Amazing. What a very, very friendly group. The last time I asked that, they're all like shouting at me, and then I got emails of abuse, whatever. But I don't know. In Ireland, it's been my experience that there's a weirdness about talking about money. Have you guys experienced that? We'll talk about sex all day long, or like people's private problems, or areas where there's like growths or whatever, But whenever it's like money, it's like, my goodness, it's seen as uncouth. Well, you know what? People are fucking dying. And whenever we started this workshop, I was talking about protecting this fellowship so that years down the line, if my children need it, it will still be there. And I was talking about the quality of the message in that context. This protect the quality of the message, this unify around the program, so that if my kids walk into an AA meeting, the quality of the message will be there. But if we don't pay for the damn thing, nothing will be there. And that's what the numbers look like based on the recommendations. So whenever I last looked at this in 2001, I had access to more data at the time, because I think I might have been the treasurer maybe. And I was able to work out that by taking the total monthly amount coming into the group, dividing it by the amount of meetings and dividing it by the average meeting attendance, we were receiving 37 pence per person who attended our meetings. It's a bit shit, isn't it? So I'm not sure if you guys are enjoying this Traditions workshop, and I'm hoping you are. And you know what I'm going to say. Feel free to express your gratitude in the form of a contribution, because that's the way AA needs to survive. We need the money to come through. A question I would ask you is the question I would ask of myself. How much did you pay for your favourite drink? My favourite drink whenever I stopped drinking was a pint of Guinness. And I had a look at the prices an hour ago. Oh my God, it's really gone up in price. I'm so glad I don't drink now. I couldn't afford it anyway. But a pint of Guinness is £5.75 in Northern Ireland on average, and €6.50 in the Republic. Don't even ask me about the prices in Dublin. Mag's only ever drank in 5-star hotels, so her average price will be substantially higher than that. So do you know how difficult it was for me to raise £5.75 to buy a pint of Guinness? And I can assure you I didn't stop at one, because I have a physical allergy that has me drink more and more. There was no hesitation whatsoever. At points of affluence and at points in poverty, I was still able to do that. Do I love my AA group? Do I love AA, the fellowship, as much as I love that pint of Guinness? It's a good question. And it's not one for me to answer, but it's one for me to throw out there. So yes, if you're keen to sort of get in line with what the treasurer of the group would like, it would be nice if we could just get monthly payments from group members. And if you think that that's an interesting way of working out what that amount should be, well, hopefully you'll find that useful. Now, is that saying that that all of that money goes into the running of the group? Well, of course not. Like, ours is an online group. Our running costs are minimal. We've got a Zoom thing that we pay for, and we've got some other expenses. And so, but the money doesn't stay with the group. Like Alcoholics Anonymous is this massive network of services, including the prison service and the public information service. There's the AA website and all the rest. There's the so-called free literature. It's not free; like somebody's paid for the production of all of that, and that all comes from the tabletop contributions of Alcoholics Anonymous. And whenever I last looked at a area report, because the next tier down from us in Northern Ireland is area, there was 22 groups were members of Belfast area, and I will not tell you how many contributed on a monthly basis. But needless to say, it was very, very pitiful. And that doesn't make sense. It simply doesn't make sense, because the guidelines are that whatever you bring in up and above your prudent reserve automatically goes to the next tier down. So if a group's running costs are, I don't know, £100 a month, and they contribute nothing, then that would mean that their income was exactly £100 per month. Because if it was £101 per month, they would pass down £1. If it was £99 per month, then it's not self-supporting and it needs to fold. So I don't understand how there can ever be an environment in which a group does not contribute to the running of Alcoholics Anonymous on the whole. I can assure you that this group hasn't fallen into that trap. Whenever we first ran this workshop, we were a physical meeting with 3 meetings a week. So we're one of the smallest meetings in the Belfast area. But once we run this workshop and we reminded everyone of what Bill Wilson's recommendations are for those who want to meet their financial requirements as a member, all of a sudden the income went through the roof, and we became and have stayed the largest contributor to Belfast area from 3 meetings a week. But just by understanding what the requirements are. Well, requirements is probably the wrong word, but certainly the recommendations. All right, let me read a wee bit more from the literature. So I'm going to read from Language of the Heart again. And so I realise that I'm running out of time very rapidly, and I can't wait to hear the questions on this one. So on page 86, the final paragraph of Tradition 7, it says, when reflecting on these things, why should not each of us tell himself, yes, we AAs were once a burden to everyone. We were takers. Now that we are sober and by the grace of God have become responsible citizens of the world, why shouldn't we now be about face and become thankful givers? Yes, it is high time that we did. Thanks, Mags. Thanks, everyone. Look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much, Brian.